In the 3 days we spent exploring the Dry Tortugas fishery on canoes and foot, one word still resonates in my head: infinity. The definition of infinity is something that has an endless extent of time, space, or quantity. In those 3 days, I found a true endless beauty in the diverse fishery and historical structures of the Dry Tortugas. This story starts with the three of us stepping onto a boat in Key West and 70 miles later standing in front of the largest masonry structure in the Americas. Walking through the main archway of a fort that was built in the middle of the ocean in the mid-1800s was like walking into a time machine. We knew right away as we entered the courtyard that time had ceased to exist, and our everyday problems in our regular lives were in the past. Right away, we set up camp and went to work rigging fly rods that range from 12 weight to 8 weights. At that time, we didn't know we should have brought more 12 weights. We had scoured aerial images of the surrounding ecosystem and researched the limited information on the local fly fishing in the months before the trip. The plan was to hunt for bonefish, permit, and giant barracuda on the surrounding flats of the beach line. When you point to a map and pick a moment in time to take a fly rod into water you've never been before, you better be ready to go with the flow. The beach area of Bush Key that we had drooled over for sight fishing on foot in the previous months had been closed off due to important bird nesting that takes place during spring and summer. We had to change our plans quickly and adapt to a more pelagic fly fishing method. Plan B was to use canoes to access the shallow coral heads to try to blind cast for various fish hiding in the diverse reefs near Fort Jefferson. We looked at what we had for fly tying materials and decided that we needed to get our flies as close as possible to the reefs to entice the various predator fish. That night we fashioned diving lips on our flies with pieces of tin cans to add more depth and action to our retrieves over the reefs. The next 2 days, painful knowledge was dropped on us every second when it came to only using long rods in the middle of the ocean. We'd all used canoes and kayaks or saltwater fishing at some point in our lives, but being in the middle of the ocean with such low freeboards was a different game for all of us. All you could do was turn off your mind to the waves cresting off the top of the gunnels and focus on the hunt. The water was so clear you could easily see the bottom structure of the reefs that we were able to access near the fort. It became a day of 1,000 casts waiting for one of the diverse alpha predators to rocket up from the safety of the coral to devastate our improvised flies. Strikes would come at any time, and you had to be ready at a moment's notice to use a tool that had been perfected for casting but lacked seriously in the fighting department. With limited mobility on our boats, we realized quickly that we could give these fish nothing during the fight. In a second, your fly and leader would be jammed into a reef never to be seen again when a grouper decided it was not going to be pulled to the surface. The finesse of our drags became less important in this style of fighting, and just pure brute force was the only thing you could use to try to pull these grouper away from their safe havens. 10 and 12 weight rods quickly started to break under the stress of these powerful fish, and by the end of the first day of fishing, we were down to a couple of 9 and 8 weight fly rods for the rest of our trip. After the sun set and the area slightly cooled in the July sun, we'd cook our freeze-dried meals that we had brought with us. After dinner was over, the only entertainment was the glow of our lantern and exhausting every theory we could come up with to keep these reef fish from rocking us on every strip strike. Hundreds of hermit crabs surrounded our camp, and you had to be extra careful not to step on them as they scurried through the darkness. They started to become part of the gang and would try to snuggle with some of us that passed out way too early from a long day in the Tortugas. The next morning, we woke early and were out in the boats again to try to battle the fish in the surrounding reefs. We were still getting rocked by the bigger fish, but managed to pull some of the smaller fish using unorthodox fighting methods before they could get to the safety of the coral. The diversity of the fishery is endless. Even the small fish we caught on 8 and 9 weights were epic because of the fighting power these pelagic species had. Every strip strike would bring a new species to be added to your life list on fly. After an epic day over the reefs and our life list dramatically added to, our spirits were high in the camp. Our friends the hermit crabs surrounded us again on the hot summer night, and crab races were used to pass the time. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no responsibility and a place where time ceased to exist. We had substantially added to everyone's fly fishing species list that day, and were now gambling our hard-earned spoils like the pirates used to frequent that area. That night, we had truly become a part of the mystique of the Dry Tortugas. The next morning was our last day in the Tortugas, and we took a warm bath to make ourselves presentable before joining the daily tourist in the fort. While on the water near the fort, you always feel like you have to keep an eye out for the resident crocodile that lives around the fort's moat. On our way to explore Fort Jefferson, we stopped off near the main docks and sight-casted some fish that had been voraciously feeding on bait that had been disturbed when the daily ferry arrived. Being inside the fort is amazing. To think of the conditions that the soldiers must have dealt with must have been unbearable. These guys were not here for some recreational fishing. They were here to battle pirates or be jailed to be forgotten about for a crime they committed on the mainland. A day here back then must have felt like an eternity in hell. Looking at the engineering of the structure is a modern marvel. Over 16 million bricks were shipped from the mainland during its construction. Standing on top of the fort, you realize that being in this place is truly like being in a time machine. We'd all found a place as fly fishermen where it could take a lifetime to catch all the endless species in this ecosystem. This truly was a place where the toils of our daily lives were put on pause, infinitely.